is Public Works. There's a lot of things that go on in development that are outside the scope of Public Works and Planning and Zoning. So well water and on-site wastewater, aka a septic system, those are permitted and those are designed through the state of Vermont regulations. We require to see that people have adequate water and wastewater. Usually they give us a copy of their WW design plans, but we don't look to see if they designed the system correctly. That's all handled through the state. Building code and fire safety code is also through the state. There are other municipalities in Vermont that have taken on that role, and when that role is taken on, it's a separate ordinance from zoning. Service specifications for gas, electricity, and internet. So if a developer is building a project, they have to provide those utilities underground. That's where our zoning authority ends. All of those other elements, how gas is connected, what your internet service is going to be, that's separate from Public Works and zoning. State highways, so Route 2 and 2A are major thoroughfares through our town. Access permits and design of those.
Recording in progress.
Are through the state agency of transportation. And then of course there's Interstate 89, which we don't allow direct connections to. That's also a state controlled right of way. And certificate of public goods. So on-site solar or renewable energy generation or cellular service, those don't need permits through the town. They're handled through the certificate of public good process. So part 2, our bylaw and the specs. The bylaw, we call it the WDB or the zoning. The public works specifications are formally the standard specifications. We call them just the specs. So there's some lingo that sometimes shows up in your staff reports and in our correspondence with you guys. I'll turn it over here.
Recording in progress.
But the DPW specs are really different from zoning. Our bylaw is quite restrictive on what Matt and I can do and where your authority lies. And the public works director has more discretion over the application of the specifications.
Thanks, Emily. So our standard specifications apply to all development that occurs in the town of Williston, whether it's going to be public infrastructure or public infrastructure. Our standards are drafted with the consultation of our town engineering firm that we work with, Aldrich and Elliott, and based on national standards and best practices. We also lean a lot on specifications from V-Trans and other national organizations, and they identified that those specifications are something that's adopted in our select board policy. So when I'm reviewing plans, I'm really looking at what they're providing me, or providing the department, and then comparing that to what is in what we have in our standard specifications, what's been adopted, and applied in accordingly. That's where you see a lot of the comments coming back, similar to what you get from planning and zoning, but more specific to the technical designs and how things get connected. Might want to connect this double chapter there.
So jumping back into the bylaw, chapter 3, actors in the administration of the bylaw, there's 10 entities listed amongst the development review board. So the zoning administrator, the conservation commission, the director of public works. So this is where the first reference of the public works standards comes into play. And there's other things that come into play, like the planning commission and select board that write and revise the zoning bylaw. Even the town manager when it comes to signing legal binding documents that that apply to the town. Chapter 6, so a quick overview of the permit process itself. Pre-application is that sketch plan level of review without extensive surveying, engineering, or design data. So this part is
breeze for Public Works because they're not looking at that complete plan set. And for planning and zoning, we're just calling out, red, yellow, green flags
and an application of, hey,
mindful
be mindful of this in our bylaw as you prepare that complete engineering set. Pre-app is also where we can ask traffic studies, shared parking studies, wetland delineation, and habitat disturbance assessments. A key thing at pre-app is it doesn't create vested rights. It's not an approval or denial. It's a punch list for the discretionary permit. And that's the big phase of review, where applicants provide a complete civil set showing all infrastructure, utility plans, erosion control, draft legal documents are provided. There's payments and fees not only to planning and zoning, but to public works. And completed reports that were requested at pre-app need to be provided. Christine, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, I would like to take minutes there, Emily, so thank you. So for Public Works, we do have an engineering fee that gets applied to a lot of the developments, particularly when there's subdivisions. Those fees go to a variety of different processes in the permit review. Part of it is for staff's time in the review process. Sometimes it goes to legal review, so if there's any types of easements that may be associated with the property or development, those go out for legal review. Those engineering fees are used for that. And then if there's going to be infrastructure that's going to become public, time going out there doing inspections, there are times where we have to have third-party inspectors out there providing oversight of the development. So again, that would be another place where those engineering fees would be applied to. Sometimes that comes up, especially when you have smaller 3 and 4 lot subdivisions. The applicants don't always understand why they have to pay up this fee, which can be fairly significant at first. But a lot of times whatever is not used goes back to the applicant once the project's completed. But that's what some different areas of those fees do get applied to.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll see third-party comments as part of that application. So there'll be a memo from Public Works on the Public Works letterhead. Sometimes bigger projects, there'll also be something from the A&E, Aldrich and Elliott on their letterhead.
Should we just jump in with questions if we have them, too disrupted?
I think let's go ahead and just before we forget them.
Still thinking about when you guys both mentioned the DPW director has more discretion, I guess, applying this DPW specs compared to.
Yeah, so those are two different lanes, right? So as Emily was saying, so the Department of Public Works responds to and reports to the select board. So the select board is one that authorizes the standard specifications. The Department of Public Works applies to development. That is separate from what your review process is when you're looking at planning the zoning processes and applying to development. So they are two different things. Really are two different lanes in how the development gets reviewed. Does that help clarify?
Can you give an example of where you use discretion to go? Maybe I'm misunderstanding. It's not that you use discretion to go outside of the specs as they are. It's that you're able to change them yearly with the.
So if we combine make changes to, if there's a request to make changes to the standard specifications, that's a request that it would start within the Department of Public Works. So if there was an outside of say an applicant was asking for a change, we would, sometimes we get feedback from consultants to say, these standards are no longer national standards, they need to be updated and they be changed, or there become changes to national standards that require us to review our standard specifications. We would implement those changes, we have to take that to the select board.
Okay, so the select board would have to ratify them before you.
Or they could be.
What it can be done on, kind of on the fly, I guess.
So there is a little bit of latitude there from the director of public works. So if we have site constraints that require minor amendments or changes that we can work with our engineers on. A lot of times that can be completed without having to go through the select board, but any significant changes or adoption of the actual public works standards is through the select board.
Okay.
I think the reason why we really wanted to highlight that today and part of the training is that the applicants, I think, sometimes don't always understand that. I think that they may come to you, to this board, and say, we want this change, we want a variance on that.
Yeah.
And that's, that goes outside of this authority, and then we'd have to go to Public Works, would have to go to.
That's great context, that's what I need to hear, thank
You
you,
know,
okay.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is like our bylaw says, only 40 homes can be on a single point of access. And that's black and white. Now, where that point of access comes out onto a town street, there's a lot of engineering guidance on how a street is like how close it is to other intersections based on slope and vehicle speeds. There's a lot of factors, and then there's a recommendation. So Public Works might say, hey, I want you to shift where you're putting your street down 50 or 100 feet to meet these transportation principles in the way I see fit for the town of Williston. Whereas we can't say, yeah, sure, you can have 45 homes in that one instance. So, and a lot of it is at the public works specification level of looking at, pump station details and material specifications and angles of things. Whereas we at the planning level, we're looking more bird's eye at the entire layout of a development. Public Works discretion might be on something that we don't even see in our plan set because it's a water detail.
Well, where you're gonna see it too is, if you open the public works specifications, for example, with streets, you're gonna see typical designs, typical cross sections for the various street types that the town will accept as new public streets, which are also the standards for our private streets, because we do them the same way. But that's one cross section, right? Streets are gonna curve and bend, and there might be line of sight issues, or, it might not, the street tree spacing might not be perfect, or the street parking might not lay out perfectly, and there are judgment calls that the public works director or designee would need to make when they're looking at the actual plan, saying, yeah, that's an 84-foot section urban street, but in this case, I mean, we've worked in this entire environment for jogging benches and bike racks to make sure the back wheel of the bicycle doesn't stick out into the sidewalk, for example. So there are these fairly, very clear, very prescriptive drawings in those specifications. And then there's just the need to apply them to a site, and the need for the town and the applicant to agree that the way that spec is being applied to the site is acceptable, because ultimately we're operating under the assumption that the town is going to have ownership and responsibility for the maintenance of those facilities once they're completed, or at some point in the future.
Yeah, and if I can add one more thing to that too, another example, and that's goes a little bit outside of where the relationship between DPW and planning and zoning is around like fire hydrants, right? Fire hydrant locations, the number of them, the spacing of them. Because Public Works maintains those fire hydrants, and we're, I'm a licensed public waste or public water operator, distribution operator. Several other of the water members are as well, department members are as well. So, we're licensed for that. We have obligations. So we're responsible for, providing clean water to the residents. And don't think about it, when we have dead end water lines and fire hydrants that are sitting stagnant, that's a potential for bacterial growth. And those are the kind of things that we have to think about and manage when we're looking at the review of a plan. And so sometimes there's maybe a little bit of, differences of opinion on how some of that layout should be, but that's where we have to really think about what's in the best interest for public health.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think that explains also why sometimes what DPW says to an applicant in pre-app, or the questions that might be answered change, and you're gonna ask different questions at discretionary permit because things have changed.
Yeah, exactly. With the changes of the site layout, there could be other nuances that are in details that come up with that, or if they're, working with another department, say again, go back to fire says we want to see this, then, we have to think about that mostly from the water perspective. We did that a lot more recently. Water pressure is always another one that doesn't often get thought of when we're in these public hearing meetings. But water pressures, we don't run water pumps, everything's gravity fed, so you gotta think about how that gets, pressures in one part of town, different pressures in other parts of the town. And that can actually have pretty big impacts on how the site gets developed.
Okay, Great, it's already derailed, but that was very helpful.
Yeah, that was a good segue. Jumping back to chapter 6, so in the discretionary permit decision, we give you that staff report and it lays out findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval. That's where comment memos get added in as a condition of approval from either an advisory committee or an advisory department for your consideration. Final plan, so this is the last step before a project can get permits that allow them to dig in the dirt. It's basically any condition of approval made by the DRB needs to get reflected in the plan set. Typically, this step is delegated to staff. Sometimes you guys retain it for a major development. Public Works must sign off on final plans before P and Z can formally approve and issue them. Non-residential development expires, whereas residential subdivision plots don't expire. So we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes after a public hearing takes place to communicate conditions of approval to the applicant. Make sure that they know what their marching orders are and revising their plan sets, and then reviewing those materials, making sure everything is all set for Christine, and staff to sign through the plans. Chapter 7, enforcement and guarantees. So, all improvements need to be installed to the public works specifications, and going along with that is development agreements, letters of credit, or escrow guaranteeing those projects. So they set money aside. It's basically insurance to the town that if this ongoing project fails, that there's some money available for the town to close up the project or complete the project. And that anything that is gonna be built to a public specification and potentially could become public in the future is guaranteed at that higher level, so that there's, you know, enough money to complete a road if the developer defaults. And at the very end of the project, as-built drawings are provided to Public Works. So going back to that conversation, nothing goes perfectly to plan. Changes are always made in the field, and making sure that that gets shown, and Public Works has record of that, so in the future, if there's a water line break, they know exactly where the water line is to fix it. Do you have anything to add on chapter 7?
No, we've got everything to do.
Chapter 13, so access, connectivity, traffic studies. This is where our bylaw standards set some of those clear black and white provisions about how many homes on a shared private driveway or on a single point of access on the road. We also have standards for type, number, and design of points of access. So if things are gonna be on Route 2 or 2A, we're telling applicants, go work it out with V-Trans. If you're gonna be on a town public road, then you need to have your engineer design plans to the Public Works specifications, to the MUTCCD.
Yeah, MUTCD,
Yeah, which is the Uniform Transportation.
manual for uniform transportation, we got messed up now. Control devices, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so guidelines for where you put in stop signs and crosswalks, and if you're doing a major development that's gonna have a lot of traffic, maybe you need to have a turning lane into your development, that kind of thing. Also where we require some connectivity as well, which we referenced in 15 and 30. So here in chapter 13, the DRB, you guys are really focused on making sure that it complies with overall principles, that there's not too many points of access onto a busy road. There's consolidated driveways and consolidated streets. That traffic studies are provided. Public Works is focused on, do the road sections meet the standards of the specs, and the more detailed components of how an intersection is created.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Emily, real quick. I think one of the things when we talk about design too, you know, for Public Works is that maintenance part of it. A lot of people don't really think about that, particularly the engineers when they're designing it. Fair enough, understandable, they're not the ones out there plowing the roads or, you know, trying to get their trucks turned around, or, you know, trying to pull their trucks out when they go off the side of the road. So a lot of times we're looking at layout and site designs, where we're really thinking a lot about that, you know, what is the long-term maintenance? how we're gonna maintain it, where is the snow gonna go? When we talk about, when we're looking at like Taft Corners, for example, you have on-street parking, and then you have a sidewalk that doesn't leave us much room for snow. We have a typical winter this year, and right now we're fighting that, right? So we have our sidewalk plows pushing the snow on the road, and then the snow, our road plows are pushing it back, and, it's just fights back and forth. So we're looking for, setbacks, and we don't, as Matt said earlier, where's the bicycle rack go? We don't want to hurt a tire or, hurt a bike when we're out there doing maintenance. So those are kind of things that we think about a lot, when we're looking at with the plans as well.
Chapter 15, on-site infrastructure. So this talks about circulation, those standards for new road construction. Where we require sidewalks or paths on both sides of new and existing roads. Private utilities, water and wastewater, both municipal and on-site. And then some limits on extensions of service. So for sewage disposal, projects must show that they are within the sewer service area limits. We have the growth management review process that we've amended over time to, reduce the influence of our permitting regime on a separate ordinance with the sewer allocation. Ultimately, when a project is going through our process, they need to check in with Public Works. They need to get a letter that there's adequate service available. They need to purchase and hold their sewer allocation. And at the end of the day, before they can build their hotel building or their new dwelling, the Public Works director needs to sign off and say, yes, they have their sewer allocation. There are a couple dead zones in the sewer service area, where physically it's mapped in the sewer service area, but there's no line in the area. A recent example would be the Batdorf subdivision that took place off of Mountain View Road. So they're in the sewer service area. It's gonna have an on-site septic system because there's no place for them to connect to a line right now. And then Christine mentioned the water issue, which we'll get to here as well. Their water pressure results came back that they wouldn't be able to connect to town water, so they have an on-site well as well, so the on-site well. So there are some places where the Public Works Director has some discretion to say, sure, I'll let there be a septic system in our sewer service area because you can't connect, or yes, you can have a well because there's no line here, or the water pressure won't let you connect.
Just real quick, if I add one thing, so similar to water, a lot of people don't think about, but sewers, 90% gravity, right? So our sewer lines, we don't, there are some pump stations, but those pump stations are typically bringing, effluent flows from private sections and private developments, and then bringing them into our municipal systems and connecting them that way. But most of the sewer system lines are gravity fed. And that, as Emily was kind of getting to as well, can create a little bit of a challenge sometimes with site design. We looked at that a little bit when we were going through the Glacier project, where we connect into existing infrastructure, the elevations, what are, where's the depths to the bedrock on the site, things like that can actually bring some challenges to how the site gets laid out or what infrastructure is needed in order to get, the solid waste, the effluent fluids out of the community, out of the development where it needs to go. So it really does take a little bit of, can have an influence on site layout and design, and sometimes the drives where applicants are like, oh, we want to do this, but we can't because this, and
Sometimes you can't because of gravity. Yes, I think I pretty much went over water and sewer together. Yeah, so we're really looking for that check, that do you have that adequate water and sewer service from the provider, whether it's on-site or public? And Public Works is really looking at, if you're doing a municipal connection, do the technical specifications meet the requirements? Chapter 18, Here we only reference the public works specification for dust suppression, but we do have standards in here about noise, odor generation. And that's really geared towards a development in its long-term operation and not construction. So if someone's going to be building an industrial facility that does a lot of manufacturing, we would be looking into this chapter quite heavily. Everything's gonna make a lot of dust and noise and odor during construction, and we don't regulate those construction nuisances. It's the long-term nuisances. Chapter 23, landscaping. Here the specs are only incorporated by reference for construction related requirements, so protecting vegetation during construction, soil volume, structural soils, coordinating with utilities and infrastructure, so you don't want street trees to be placed right over a water sewer line. There needs to be certain separation between landscaping and infrastructure. And street trees, both the standards in our bylaw and the sections in public works specs call for the placement of street trees, you know. We like there to be some space between the curb and the sidewalk, so there's room to plow snow, there's space for that type of thing. Watershed health, so chapter 29, a lot of chapter 29 is about an erosion control plan, so how you're gonna maintain water quality during construction, and then our wetlands and watershed health standards. I'll let Christine talk a little bit more about stormwater specifically.
Yep, thank you, Lynn. So the town of Williston is an MS4, so it's a municipal separate sewer system. And what that requires of us is that we have 6 different really minimal measures that we need to meet as part of our permit obligations, includes like public outreach, education, and overview site construction activities, making sure that there's no significant discharges of sediment and other potential pollutants to surface water. That can be things like tracking mud on the roads, because you know, our drainage ditches along the side of the road are actually part of the whole MS4 stormwater infrastructure. A lot of people don't think about that. So when you see sediment being tracked out on the road off a construction site, or even sometimes off of residential activities, there's part of that's a public safety for the traveling, for the vehicles that are traveling on the lane. The other side of that too is the environmental concerns, when that runs off and goes into our drainage channels or into our catch basins, into our closed pipe systems. So the requirements of us being under an MS4 does put it, because we are permitted by the state, it's not delegated authority, it's the actual permit. So there are liabilities for us that are associated with that. So non-compliance, if we were to be audited by the EPA or by the state, they will look for those types of activities and oversight, make sure that we are reviewing that. There's also requirements for checking out falls and other activities, but as it particularly relates to development today, a lot of that's around construction activities and how do you mitigate environmental impacts of disturbing those acres while those acres are being disturbed, and keeping some limitations around that. Not to get too deep in the weeds, but there's a lot of there's some different steps to constructions. So what they call like a low impact project would be under 5 acres. And so you'll see a lot of projects that will come in and say, we're going to disturb 4.9 acres in phase 1. That's where that's coming from. And so when I'm looking at plans and I'm saying, well, you're telling me you're going to disturb, you have an 8-acre parcel, but you're on a low impact permit, show me your boundary for phase 1 if you say you're only going to disturb 4.9 acres at any one given time. Because that's where we as the town have a responsibility to be out there and saying, you said you're gonna do this, and we have a charge by our permit to oversee construction activities, that we then need to actually make sure that they are staying under those 5 acres. We don't go out there and actually measure it off, but it's pretty notable. That's why we do say delineate this for us on a map. So I go out in the field, or our stormwater coordinator goes in the field, or even Bruce goes in the field, they have a map and they can say, okay, here's where you said your boundaries are gonna be for this phase. are you, actually staying true to that? So, sometimes you'll see that kind of comes up, and some of our comments are related to that. Just trying to make sure that what they're presenting to us is consistent with what they're applying to the station.
In terms of the DRB and watershed health, I think this does come up, in public comments sometimes, is we require applicants to show us their plans for long-term stormwater management in terms of gravel wetlands, swales, ditches along sides of rural roads. So they're required to show those, but our bylaw doesn't have standards for, oh, you have 5,000 square feet of impervious, here's what you need to do for stormwater. That comes out of the state regulations. And then the town and the state permits, those two interfacing together is different than our bylaw process.
Yeah, I think so, and I'm glad you brought up the gravel wetlands and different post-construction stormwater best management practices, because that does sometimes become a talking point and a little bit confusion for residents. So the town does not administer permits for stormwater activities, but again, as part of our MS4, one of our minimum measures is post-construction inspections. So we do construct during construction, and then we do have to make sure that whatever they have said they're gonna construct actually gets there afterwards. Sometimes there's an overlap, so sometimes the town is being asked to be a co-permittee because we have runoff from public roads that go into that stormwater system, and then so there are circumstances where the town becomes a permittee to an operational, what's called an operational permit, in addition to our MS4 permit. And so when that starts to happen, then, they can get a little bit more, involved, a little more detailed, and a little more complicated. But yeah, so we don't always get off the hook right at the end of construction. There is some post-construction requirements, part of our MS4 permit too.
So I'll pause there, that kind of wraps up our bylaw chapters. Are there any questions on bylaw chapters and public works specs?
I just want to mention one thing while you're talking about, stormwater and watershed health. A common public comment that will come up during development review is, well, when you put that new development in with all its stormwater ponds, it's going to saturate the groundwater and my basement's going to be wet. And the short answer to that is we don't have a regulation about what happens with groundwater in that way. People have to meet treatment standards. Generally, when they're creating impervious surface on site and they're adding stormwater protection measures, they're under a standard of there actually being no change to less runoff off the site post-construction. But that's about surface runoff. If anybody's been around for the build out of the Northridge project, we've had a lot of neighbor complaints. I never had water in my basement before that development uphill from me went in. And the hard answer that we have to kind of give people is, if they're within their permits, there's really not anything for the town to do about that. And proving causality is really hard. We've had a bunch of wet summers. A lot of people who never had water in their basements had water in their basements, but water and runoff, and I'm worried that there will be more runoff in my neighborhood because of the neighborhood up the hill building is a very common piece of public input that you'll get, and it's important to just understand as you're interacting with those developments that the surface runoff management is being built to, but a very high standard that actually is not entirely under the control of the town. And despite that, we live in a wet climate that's getting wetter with a lot of heavy soils. And sometimes, people will see change as the town changes.
Yeah, especially when clay gets saturated, it swells up and your infiltration just falls away, right? We have a lot of high clay concentrations in our soils out here, so that's one that does come up quite a bit. And the other thing I would add to that, and I appreciate bringing it up, is a discharge location, so sometimes you'll hear neighbors saying, well, the discharge from that system is gonna be directed towards my property, or, you know, they've done this change and now it comes onto my property. It's, you know, my understanding in the way that it's been, you know, I don't wanna give legal advice here, because I'm obviously not a lawyer, but my understanding that there's the, runoff is allowed to go downhill the way it always has gone downhill. And so, there's impacts from one private property's action to another private property, then that's between the two private properties. But I look at plans regularly where there's a outlet that's discharging in the direction of somebody's property and they're not happy about that, but that's not against the law, as I understand it, so.
There's a legal document about, you know, runoff to go down and.
Right, yeah.
One thing I'd like to add too, and mainly directed for the, you know, the new people on the board, is simply that, you know, we're here to uphold the regular rules and regs, that's, you know, what's spelled out by Emily, running us through all of the, unified plan and the development standards. But it's not our decision to say you can't build it. If they show up, if the applicant shows up and have done all the work that, that has been described tonight, they get the permit. They get to build it. We don't get to say, no, you don't get to. And you will face people in the audience who will passionately tell you that they should not be allowed to build a project. And yet, you know, that's why we do what we do and why we have a bylaw that says you do this and you follow the rules and you provide all of the documentation that you need to provide, you get to build your project. And if you don't do that, you don't get to build the project. But it's, you have to kind of tune out the passion of the neighbor, you know, telling you, you should not allow this to happen. But that's not our role.
Appreciate that, Scott, and if it makes anybody feel better, we get told the same thing often. There's not the public environment. It's sometimes a little, not so clean when they fall.
I just wanted to comment on the stormwater thing, and, yeah, I know my own personal experience. Hope settling around the foundations over time, that I would, like, it would rain, I'd have water pooled up against my foundation, and water in the basement. It's a very simple grading so that it doesn't do that, but problem solved. So.
Right.
And, you know, like I said, you know, I live in Chelsea Commons, and you look at every house around the foundations, it's set up.
Yeah.
Because
that's what happens.
Right, exactly.
I got a complaint from one person in the neighborhood, like, if your neighborhood was proposed today, it could not be built because it is in a wetland. Like, it is 100% surrounded by wetland, like, it got permitted in the 80s and it couldn't happen today. So we're gonna shift to part 3 now, talking a little bit more about the super fun procedural stuff. During a public hearing, all questions and comments should be directed through the chair. We are a little bit casual, we are a little bit informal in that regard, we're not following Robert's rules to a perfect T. But at the end of the day, if things start to feel like they're getting more and more contentious, the more and more we can revert to formality and direct things to the chair. So when I'm reading a staff report, I'm reading it to the chair, even though sometimes I might be answering a question and facing the applicant. The chair can set time limits or other parameters for public comment to maintain an efficient meeting. The chair can, with the advice of staff, decide on what items can or cannot be resolved in a public hearing. So for example, we might say, we can say, yes, a type 3 or type 4 buffer will be a condition of approval, but we're not gonna go into species count, exact locations in the hearing. And that's kind of that discretion of what do staff and the board feel comfortable answering at a technical level in the hearing, and what is a conversation that should happen offline. So I feel pretty comfortable in a hearing saying no more than 40 houses on a single point of access. You're showing 45, we need to drop that back. If they start to ask about, well, how can I rearrange my layout to get that second point of access, let's talk about that offline after the hearing. Hearings are for taking and reviewing all testimony and seeking high-level clarifications from all parties. So we're doing a court-like process where You guys are the judge, we're presenting testimony, the applicant's materials are testimony, comment letters are testimony. We're making sure we have all of the facts and information that's needed before closing a hearing. Sometimes we continue a hearing because we want more information from the applicant before we close and review the conditions of approval. And the DRB hearings aren't for adjudicating those technical requirements of the bylaw standards or the public works specifications, and there can be some nuance and flexibility for how we handle that together on a case-by-case basis. And there, I'll turn it over to Erin for some more roles in DRB hearing.
So Emily and Christine gave an overview of how responsibilities are divided between planning and zoning and some DRB, and I'll just briefly kind of talk about how those play out in meetings. Emily, you actually covered some of my slides. And a lot of this is really more for the newer members, seasoned people that are processing. But yeah, like Emily said, DRB hearings are quasi judicial, so the structure really matters. The bylaws lay out clear framework. Staff present reports. Testimony is received and questions and responses are directed through the chair. Board members participate throughout, and then the chair helps guide the discussion so it stays organized and the record is clear. As issues become more complex or nuanced, you'll just want to continue to lean on that structure to ensure that it's clear and fair for participants involved. And that's, you know, how structure shows up during the hearings themselves. A lot of what makes that work really is before the meeting. So preparation really makes a real difference in how smoothly hearings run. Reviewing staff reports and application materials ahead of time, raising technical questions in advance will help your hearings really stay focused on the issues that matter during the meeting. Emily mentioned the town volunteer policy. It is posted on the town website. We're currently undergoing a really significant review of that policy, so that happens to make sure you get an updated one. But something that's in there that will always continue is just encouraging reaching out to staff with any clarifying questions that you have. So outside of meetings, planning staff are really your best point of contact if they staff you directly. And then they can coordinate any additional follow-up or questions with departments and staff like Christine to help you with those technical questions. So a general guide would be, you know, questions about testimony, evidence, or merits of specific applications are appropriately asked at the meeting so that it's part of the public record. But any technical or clarifying questions, you can often just really address ahead of time. That. And then serving on the DRB is a public trust, so applying professional judgment within clear rules and procedures supports thoughtful decisions and then deliver a public record. An important piece of context relevant for you and also for staff. These meetings are recorded, they are posted online. A lot of prospective volunteers, board members, potential staff, a lot of times they'll look at those meetings to just get an understanding about how the town operates and just the general awareness and the culture here. So something to keep in mind as you're holding your meetings. So it doesn't just document decisions, but really reflects the town of Williston. So that's another piece of why you want to think about how the structure of the discussion and clarity of the process really plays out during the meeting. And so for the quasi-judicial board like yourselves, staff who support that work, professionalism isn't just about setting the tone, but it directly supports fairness and defending really good decisions that you make. In summary, clear rules, preparation and structured process help you operate your work well. And that's just a really high level synopsis. I'll turn it back over to Emily.
Yeah, so to wrap up, reach out to Matt or myself if you have any questions, even if it's a technical question that we might put to Christine or the town manager's office, reach out to us first. Questions will come up so we can debrief at our next meeting on March 24th. And something for you guys to think about is what topics are of interest for you on future trainings. We could deep dive into a specific chapter, talk more about the historic committee or the conservation commission. We could look more into, the history, plannings, and policy shifts of the town, facilitation and communication for quasi judicial proceedings. So highlighting what Erin said, our staff report template is really built to focus your attention directly on the issues at hand. We bold and underline the sections that we really want the board to focus on in the hearing, and that makes it, easy for applicants to understand what the hearing is gonna be focused on, and it helps you guys have a really efficient hearing that we're using our time productively to talk about important aspects of the application that need to be resolved before the next permit phase. And we're always open to ways of improving it and evolving things, making it work for you guys as a board, and always open to feedback.
What we're trying most for in the hearing, I think what benefits everybody the most is clarity. So, the staff here puts a tremendous amount of work into writing these staff reports, for everybody's benefit, to try to make sure we all kind of come into the hearing room, with the same accurate understanding of what all the moving parts are of a project and, what needs to be discussed, like Emily said, what's emphasized, but at the same time, you work on complicated projects that do have a lot of moving parts, and I would encourage all the members, if you kind of get lost or wait, I'm not clear what the bylaw says about that, through the chair and in the hearing, asking for that clarity in the moment can be really helpful. And I think the number of times as a staff or for a DRB or other public body where I've been watching and not wanting to interrupt, but realizing that something has started to go sideways because somebody misunderstood what the applicant was, maybe the applicant misunderstood the question the chair asked, or maybe somebody misunderstood something in the bylaw, and we want to help you steer back on course when that happens, because there is a lot of information flying around about some of these projects, and so there are no stupid questions. There is not a limit on how many times you can say, hey, wait a minute, Mr. Chair, can I just clarify? Could Emily explain what that part of the bylaw means again as it applies to this project? Or applicant, could you answer that question again? I really want to make sure I understand it. This is a great time to do that, and it supports that record that Erin was talking about. That in Williston, we're not a record review town, which means if a decision of the DRB is appealed to the state environmental court, it's reviewed de novo, meaning all new. The court just says, now we're the DRB. And we're just gonna do a redo of this review. But you know what? The first thing that court also does is they read the minutes of the DRB meeting. They read the record of the proceeding that happened here because it helps them gain understanding. And so when we can provide that clear record and show that there was a fact-based review happening, it helps the town navigate any of those appeals to court proceedings efficiently and at the lowest cost to the taxpayer ultimately, which is part of what we're trying to do here. So don't be afraid to ask questions or get things clarified in the hearing. Nobody comes into this an expert, not even us.
That's very helpful, and I think that's something I wish I had done more prior to this position, was just reach out to town staff after reading a report prior to a meeting. It's no problem doing that. They pick up the phone very quickly. And I guess any other pressing questions from the DRB before we move on for staff? That was a great training. Thank you, Emily, Christine, Erin. For members of the public who just arrived, the DRB has just completed a routine training. We're going to take maybe a quick 5 minutes here. We will resume with regular agenda meetings no later than 7 p.m. And if there's nothing else, we're going to go right into that 5-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, ladies, you want us to do just like
Yeah, I made
Okay.
Right. So just to reiterate where I was at, Conservation Commission looked at what's being proposed here, and looked at that map that we use for where 30% or steeper slopes are. And with their discussion led to was a conclusion that it's really too small a scale to reasonably require a strict interpretation of that clause to separate out those small triangles from the proposal. So what the DRB should do is decide whether you concur with that interpretation of the bylaw. That's really the first area for discussion on this. All right. So moving on, the next element with regards to chapter 31 is a couple of simple compliance things. So building envelopes must be reduced in size to 1.5 acre. They're currently proposed at between 0.75 and 1.25 acres. So those need to be reduced, but at discretionary permit. And I'll note that septic systems are exempt from that clearing limit, as well as driveways and utilities. All right, so the next component, which is in some ways the biggest challenge for the applicants that was identified during pre-app review, has to do with access to these new lots. WDB 31.9.3 are the standards that really says that new lot sites, have to provide for safe road access. And what comes into play here is primarily what's being proposed, and then what Public Works has determined in response to that proposal in terms of what can work at this site. So what I'll do to explain this real quick is jump to an aerial view of the area, the site. So right here, this is the parcel. You can see Lincoln Road is a gravel class 3 road that moves east towards the site. And that road terminates right at the start of this parcel, where there's an existing driveway, goes up to the existing home site. And what we're seeing right here is a turnaround where plows and road equipment will turn around. So there's been some gravel pushed a little further into Lincoln Road, but the rest of this is unpassable, unmaintained road. And in terms of how it is defined legally, it's been defined, we've learned it as a class 3 road. However, as an unmaintained road, it's qualified by Vermont Department of Transportation is not up to standards, but functionally a class 4 road. So a road that does not permit vehicles, and there's no intention for the town of maintaining it. So I'll jump back to the site plan here. And what has been proposed by the applicant is to extend the functional part of Lincoln Road down that what's currently unpassable functional class 4 road. And that would provide an opportunity for those two new lots to connect to that extended road. So the applicant has actually already, upon taking a look at this staff report prior to the hearing tonight, has already engaged with Public Works to have some conversations. But Williston Public Works sent a memo during their review of this proposal and noted a couple of things that are challenges about this plan. The first being that there's no plans for the town certainly to extend the functional portion of the road. And it's incompatible with providing safe access to simply have new home lot access off of a class 4 road or functionally class 4 road. Because there is no safe access for vehicles. The second thing that was identified is that Williston does not have, or the Department of Public Works does not have a gravel road standard. So there really is currently no mechanism for which an applicant could build a extension of a gravel road that would meet the town standard. So the only option for an applicant would be to build a section of road that meets the existing class 3 road standards for a paved road. So this introduces some challenges, and really in terms of the hearing tonight, our recommendation is simply that this is an area where the proposal overlaps with some elements of the bylaw that requires safe access, but also overlaps significantly with public works standards and what could be permitted or not according to Williston Public Works. So our recommendation really here is simply that this is something that needs to be worked out between pre-app and DP, but it's not something that necessarily requires the DRB to weigh in, other than noting that there are elements of the bylaw here that can't be satisfied by the current plan if it doesn't work for DPW. All right, so I'll jump forward to other areas that, because a lot of things to mention here, but some of them are straightforward. In terms of complying with what the bylaw says about driveways, it's not worth digging too much into this, given that there are questions about the existing proposal in terms of using Lincoln Road, but we'll note simply that the DRB or the bylaw does require certain standards for driveways. For example, that driveways connect to roads at 90 degrees, plus or minus 10 degrees, I believe, but they meet certain grade requirements. And so between pre-app and app, as the applicant works with Department of Public Works to figure out what could work for access, there are a few things that will need to be adjusted with regards to the specs in order for those driveways to comply with the bylaw. All right. Now, in terms of landscaping, this is forested residential. There's really not much to say here. Given that these are forested sites, existing vegetation is expected to be retained largely in the setbacks, which would create the type 1 50-foot existing vegetation buffers. Street trees are often required by the bylaw, but they also may be waived as a requirement by the DRB in situations like this, where you have really a forested setting where it wouldn't necessarily make sense to require street trees. So staff recommends that the DRB waives the requirement for street trees on Lincoln Road. All right, and that brings us to conservation areas. I'll show real quick the natural resources map that was submitted by Bowman Consulting, just to give you a sense for what's going on at this site, which is really that it overlaps entirely with many of the elements that Williston tracks in terms of conservation areas. You see this small locator map is mapped within a large area that is mapped as core habitat and travel corridors. The whole parcel, more or less, is mapped for occurrences of uncommon and rare species. And there's also other conservation areas that overlay. So there's a lot of things going on in terms of conservation values, but I have already mentioned that the open space configuration here does a really nice job of capturing those and preserving them in the open space. So there's really only a few elements that deserve further discussion in terms of what's going on here. And the first is significant wildlife habitat area. When development is proposed in a significant wildlife habitat area, that's those core habitats and travel corridors, Williston's bylaws kick into action a process that calls for a habitat disturbance assessment. So that a biologist can go out on the ground and take a look at what's really out there in terms of hotspots or wildlife specific resources that can be identified and avoided in terms of development. Now, the habitat disturbance assessment has been a requirement for a while, and it used to be the case that applicants contracted a habitat disturbance assessment themselves. In 2024, at the start of that year, a change in the bylaw required that habitat disturbance assessments be contracted directly by the town. And that change was made to encourage quality standards and impartiality on behalf of the biologist. Now, the conundrum in this particular case is that the applicant initiated a habitat disturbance assessment directly for this site with the contractor Bowman. Bowman ecologist Levi Kesey went out on the site and prepared a HDA, did some work over the fall assessing the site and presented that information to the Conservation Commission, who got a chance to look at that. Typically, the way that the process would work over the last 2 years is that during pre-app, any concerns would be identified regarding conservation areas. We'd write up a scope of work after pre-app, and the town would contract the biologist to go do the habitat disturbance assessment before discretionary permit. So what we have here is some misunderstanding about what the bylaw says right now, and that the current habitat disturbance assessment, although the Conservation Commission found it informative, noted that it doesn't meet the bylaw as written because it wasn't contracted by the town. So we've discussed with Bowman, we've discussed with the applicant, and we discussed with the Conservation Commission, and what we're proposing to do to really meet that bylaw is that the town will contract a third-party independent biologist to conduct a external habitat disturbance assessment. However, the goal here is really to minimize redundancy, knowing that the ecologist that did this assessment has worked for the town before in the past to do assessments. And from looking at that report, the Conservation Commission could understand that most of the information that collected was done so in a way that it would still be relevant. So what we're proposing is that the town will still contract a third-party biologist, but that biologist may look at the work that's already been done by Bowman, peer review that work, do whatever else they might need to do in order to make an independent assessment of how habitat will be impacted on site by the proposed work, but using that existing work to streamline the scope of work. So it'll be up to the DRB to determine if you agree with that course of action, if you think anything different should happen in a certain instance.
By making this accommodation, how do you keep that from happening again in the future?
This was a concern of the Conservation Commission as well. What I will say is that we're not proposing a loophole to the bylaw. What we're proposing is that a town contracted habitat disturbance assessment is conducted. However, there has been information that has already been collected that is on the table and was collected in a season that is different than the season it is now. So it'd be really useful information for that biologist to look at. That existing, or the work that was done established some things that it would not necessarily be efficient for the biologist that the town contracts to go do again, given what we've learned. So typically, if we were starting from scratch, having looked at this pre-app, we'd write up a scope of work, and knowing what we know, that scope of work would be limited. Some of the things that were looked into, I wouldn't think would need to be looked into again. So I understand that it is,
That's not the point.
yeah. Did that answer your question? Somewhat,
It really wasn't a question.
yeah, fair. Any other comments on that point? Uncommon rare threatened species. They're mapped on this site. They were not found during the initial work that was done. As required by the bylaw, the applicants reached out to the state biologist at Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department for further comment. So we'll have more information on whether they think any additional work needs to be done. Brownell Mountain is a very unique natural community as the bylaw defines it. It's a unique ecological feature in Williston, a very important one. There's a large town-owned parcel immediately adjacent to this. So it will be very important for the features associated with that feature, Brownell Mountain, to be protected in terms of the wildlife habitat and forest that's there. And really those features are well protected by the proposed configuration of open space. There are scenic view sheds mapped in the area. Conservation declined to make any recommendations. They felt that there was no concern as to impacts on scenic view sheds by the proposal. All right, there are also no class 2 wetlands on site. So all watershed health recommendations are standard. And the last area that is kind of unique to this site is in terms of the official map. So you'll see in this small map here that there are desired trails that intersect with the parcel just at the east and southern boundaries of this. And where desired trails are on our official map is they've been placed on the official map to show a place where pedestrian or multi-use infrastructure is desired by the town. However, depending on when they were placed on that map, they were mapped with varying levels of precision. In this case, it's not necessarily clear that the fact that they overlap with the parcel is a strong indicator that there was intent to place a trail directly on that parcel. And what the Conservation Commission discussed was Lincoln Road is a gravel road that, in addition to allowing for vehicular access, also accommodates bicycles, pedestrian use. And it's where it terminates in terms of its functional vehicle use at the start of this parcel. It becomes essentially a primitive path that is used by pedestrians and occasional cyclists today. That path continues into St. George and connects to Route 116. And so the Conservation Commission felt that the functionality that is really represented by that map desired trail is already accommodated by the presence of that class 4 road. And so the current proposal effectively already accommodates that desired trail that's represented there. Right. That's the issues that were identified during pre-app review by planning staff. In terms of recommendations, this all follows from what we just discussed. Some things straightforward and some things that should be reviewed by the DRB. Really, the key one here is that the applicant needs to work with Department of Public Works to determine the feasibility of that proposed access plan and identify an alternative if it's not gonna work. And I'll leave it there. Any questions from the DRB?
Thank you, David. DRB, anything for David? Nope. In that case, we will turn it back over to the applicant here. Gentlemen, any either questions for David or the board, or are there any areas you'd like to fill in after what you heard on the staff report?
Not really. I think the only I mean, the big question will be access. You know, we coming into this assumed that, you know, with a class 4 right of way, fronting on this property, that we'd be able to somehow use that for access. So we have proposed, private driveway, 14 feet wide, across the frontage of both lot 1 and 2. With the understanding that, the town would not maintain that, it would be the responsibility of the future lot owners to maintain it. And the town would continue to, plow and their maintenance, where they do now at the beginning of Richard and Sue's driveway. But clearly, as Dave said, after meeting with Public Works, that doesn't seem to be an option, so we're gonna have to. And that was only yesterday we met, so we're still kind of pondering that, but the option presented to us is, if we want frontage, if we want these lots to gain access off of the class 4 road, we'll need to build 26-foot wide paved road for 200 feet, extending off Lincoln Road, which is a 20-foot wide gravel road. So will that look ridiculous? Absolutely. And we need a substantial turnaround somewhere at the terminus of that road for town maintenance vehicles to turn around, because they will maintain the road once we build it. But we're not too encouraged that that's economically an option at this point, so we'll continue the discussion with Public Works to see if there's any wiggle room there. But it's potential, like discretionary. These lots, when we come in, may have access off the existing driveway and not off class 4. Meaning, so Rick and Sue's driveway is that shaded area, to the upper portion. So these lots may end up being turned 90 degrees potentially and being stacked along the contours and have individual or shared access off of Rick and Sue's driveway. That's one consideration.
How would that affect your current open space?
I don't think it really would. It would just be taking that division line and drawing it perpendicular to what it is now.
Okay.
But the perimeter, of those 2 lots would stay relatively the same, I would envision.
Okay.
We'd like to have 1 acre lots just for marketability, which is what they are now, slightly over.
DRB, any questions or comments from the applicants? Members of the public, do we have any questions or comments from members of the public in person or on Zoom?
The attendee on Zoom has not raised their hand.
In that case, if you don't have anything else at this point, we will close this hearing at 7:44 p.m. Thank you both.
Okay, thanks.
Next up is BP 24-08.1, Jim and Lucy McCullough. Pre-app review of a proposed development with 32 dwelling units at 88 Mountain View Road. Could the applicants please come on up and state your names for the record?
That roll chair.
I'm Cole Westwood Bowman.
Good evening, Jim McCullough for the Lucy Jim McCullough LLC. It's warned here in the reverse of the first 2 names.
Okay.
And Lucy Thayer, no relation, landscape architect with Bowman, Engineering.
Jim, Lucy, I'm sorry, can you say your first name again? Cole. Cole, thank you. All right, staff goes next.
All right. I'll also be walking you through this staff report, and tag teaming with my colleague. And then also as a needed. This is DP 24-08.1. So this is the second iteration of this project that has been brought to the DRB. So a new configuration and really design that's pre-apping again at 88 Mountain View Road. So the request is for this proposed subdivision to create 2 lots from the existing lot. Lot 1 is the 8.78 acre development, which is 32 unit development, including 9 single unit dwellings, 8 duplex units, and 15 triplex units, and a community center. And then the second lot is about 1.5 acres, which encompasses the existing dwelling. I will jump to the site plan just briefly so that folks can get a better view of that before we dig into the proposal. But here you can see at the upper left is that lot 2 encapsulating the existing dwelling, and the rest of the site up to this line here is this 32 unit proposed dwelling off the loop road that connects to Mountain View Road. All right, now this project design and layout is based on the Maharishi Vastu architecture principles that dictate building and access orientation. So the building and site has been designed such that buildings are entered from the east, or where that's not possible from the north. And there are other site design features, such as fences around buildings and architectural features that have come from that architectural principle. All right, staff recommended action tonight is to take testimony, close, deliberate, and approve. This was also reviewed by the Conservation Commission, also includes comments from Public Works and Fire. For this application, we do have one public comment letter was received at the time of mail out. There's also public comment offered during the brief public hearing that occurred a month ago. Okay, so this project is in the RZD, so residential zoning district standards are a little bit different than the project we just talked about, but some of the considerations are still the same. In terms of section 38, chapter 38, the RZD section, when it comes to compliance with the bylaw, there's a few things that need to be adjusted for discretionary permit. One of those is that turnaround and parking areas have, as designed, occur in the setback off of roads. And so that is not in compliance with the bylaw, should be adjusted through design. That's the case for units 12 through 14, and a couple other units. And also 21 through 23, there's a small parking spur that extends into a side setback. Other elements of open space development as they apply to the RZD are what we've seen is more likely to compliance with watershed buffers, class 2 wetlands. The buffer is well documented and avoided in the proposed plan. There is a scenic view shed that is shown, and we'll talk about that a little bit in terms of what was reviewed by the Conservation Commission. But the plan, as presented, does make some accommodations for that scenic view shed, and it seems like with some small adjustments, this proposal will likely accommodate that conservation concern. Right now, one area that the DRB will need to discuss and make an interpretation on is with regards to what this chapter of the bylaw says for pedestrian-friendly development. And that is that all principal building entrances must face the street. And there must be a direct pedestrian connection between the principal building entrance and the adjoining sidewalk or trail. So if we jump back to the site plan, well, there are two buildings, triplex unit 21 through 23 and unit 24, which do not strictly conform with this requirement of the bylaw. In attempt to meet the architectural principles of this site, those buildings are oriented towards the north. The driveway extends off of the road to create north access. So DRB will need to do some deliberation, discuss whether they think that this plan can be modified to be met, or whether there'll need to be a change in design. Staff has presented that at a minimum, a pedestrian sidewalk will need to connect from the road to the entrances on the adjoining street sidewalk. All right. Couple other things to note in terms of chapter 11, affordable homes and growth management. There's two tracks that this applicant could take in terms of how they want to proceed with meeting the requirements of this section. Option one is simply that a discretionary permit, choose the track that includes affordable homes. And option two would be to go through the growth management process in the bylaw. And then discretionary. And then all units in the plan would be provided at market rate. Another element for review of the DRB is in terms of access management. So Mountain View Road is considered a major collector road. And so consolidated access to local roads is strongly preferred by the bylaw. What is proposed here is that the applicant, by the applicant, is simply that the existing home site will maintain their existing driveway independently of the new road that is proposed. So if I jump back to the site plan, we'll see that the development has its own curb cut, an internal road structure that's not connected, completely separate than the curb cut and existing driveway for the road. So the DRB should discuss and really decide if the recommendation is necessary to consolidate access for all dwellings on this property. The next item with regards to the design where a decision will have to be made is that, as you can see on the site plan, this loop road is shown connecting to the east across the property lines to where the new road will be built by the Sally's Way development. There's some challenges with that proposal simply because what's being proposed is to build across private land that's not at review and up for discussion here. So that really would need to occur based on a private agreement between the applicant as with regards to this property and the owner and developer and the adjacent property. So if a private agreement can be determined with regards to how to build that road to the satisfaction of both parties, then certainly this would there'd be ways to accommodate this and have it work with the bylaw. However, if that arrangement cannot be made, then most likely the way to meet the requirements of the bylaw would be to terminate that road between units 15 and 16. As you can see with this line drawn here. So it just becomes a simple loop. And then rather than building this extra street off to the right, the property line with no destination, a private driveway would serve units 16 through 20.
I'll add on this one, the DRB doesn't need to decide on these options tonight. The applicant doesn't need to decide on the options. It's just as you proceed to discretionary permit, your plan set, then the accompanying documents might be a little bit different.
Thanks for the clarification. All right. On-site infrastructure. Sidewalks and recreation paths, have been proposed. And there are some adjustments that could be made. There's areas where sidewalks should be added and a few areas where they can be removed. That doesn't require extensive review at this time. And that brings us to the official map. So all along Mountain View Road, the official map shows a multi-use path, which is a high priority infrastructure item for the town of Williston. So it will be required by this applicant to build a section of that multi-use path across the frontage of Mountain View Road. And that has been accommodated, I believe that has been accommodated by the existing plan. But it will need to be included in discussion.
While you're on that, can I say one,
Yep, absolutely.
one question, on the, where the sidewalks are delineated, I thought you said earlier that the two buildings, 24 and then 21 to 23, which were facing north and didn't front the road, would have to have a sidewalk. That's not listed on here.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's, I understand that's up for DRB to determine, but seems to me that it should be pointed out, so I'm pointing it out.
Yeah, if you go to the red and green diagram,
Yeah.
sidewalks. So on this one, I was showing sidewalks that would be within the road right of way. Green is where sidewalk or multi-use path was missing on the plans, would need to be shown. Red is a duplicative section of sidewalk that isn't needed. And this does not show what you're asking about, which is the sidewalk from the right of way to the front door of
If
the
the buildings
houses.
can maintain the northerly,
Yeah.
so. Okay, great, thank you.
All right, do you want to jump in, Emily,
On density?
on density?
Yeah, so jumping on density, I know I had some DRB member questions for clarification on this one. So this project complies with our density. The base density is 5 dwelling units per acre, which is not a minimum density, it's the maximum. So at that standard density of 5 dwelling units per acre, they could have up to 51 units. If they wanted more than 51 units, then they would be in the affordable density level, which is 7 dwelling units per acre, which would be up to 72 dwelling units. They're proposing 32 dwelling units, so they don't need to go to that 7 dwelling units per acre. They're fine at 5 dwelling units per acre. And again, the base density isn't a minimum, it's a maximum.
And to confirm, it does not trigger the affordability.
Correct. Base density does not trigger the affordability. However, the growth management might. So it's a multivariable equation where they could be required to have affordability component if they move through chapter 11 as inclusionary zoning, but that's different than the density of chapter 19.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Landscaping, the proposal, the pre-app proposal here mostly complies with the landscaping chapter. A few elements, one of which has already been pointed out, a parking area that's shown entering into a side buffer, which would need to be landscaped with a landscape buffer. However, on street trees, there is a decision for the DRB to make, and that's really whether or not to waive the street tree requirement here on Mountain View Road. This is an open question. As you can see on the small map here, there's a scenic view shed. It's a relatively small one in the grand scheme of scenic view sheds in Williston, but as a driver would turn onto Mountain Road, there is a glimpse of Camel's Hump to the southeast above the tree line there. So it's certainly consideration on this site. The Conservation Commission has discussed whether or not to include those street trees and to consider waiving that requirement. It's worth noting that has been done at other lots that have developed on Mountain View Road where there is a view shed. It was not waived the requirement for the immediately adjacent development at Sally's Way. So there's a choice to be made in terms of what is required there. All right, and that really brings us to conservation areas. And really the only conservation area of note that intersects with this property is the scenic view shed. The Conservation Commission discussed. And at this time, their only recommendation is really that the applicant creates a rendering of what the site would look like from that vantage point. So that at the review for discretionary permit, they can make a more informed decision about what they'd like to recommend for the DRB in terms of the requirement for street trees or not. Watershed health, I mentioned that there is a class 2 wetland on site. The site plan accommodates a full 50-foot buffer around class 2 wetland. There are also class 3 wetlands on site, they're not regulated. And that brings us really to the recommendations, which we've mentioned here throughout the discussion already. So there's a recommendation that DRB may wish to modify regarding how they want to weigh in on the interpretation of the bylaw that all principal entrances need to face a road. So units 21 through 24 at question there. So that's recommendation 1C. And recommendation 2D, most of the recommendations on 2 are standard, just encouraging that the applicant will need to work on their plan to comply with all the different requirements of the bylaws. They give a discretionary permit. But for 2D, this is the question of whether the DRB will want to require consolidated access or whether they think that the proposal is sufficient with 2 separate curb cuts off Mountain View Road. So the DRB should decide whether lot 1 can retain its separate curb cut or whether the plan should be designed in such a way that there will only be 1 consolidated access off Mountain View Road. And the rest of the recommendations are fairly boilerplate. Simply call the applicant's attention to compliance with the different recommendations that have been made by town departments and the Conservation Commission. And I will leave it there.
Thank you, David. Board, do you have any questions for David, town staff? Okay, then we will go back to the applicants. Is there anything you'd like to fill in for us on the staff report before the board may ask you questions?
Do you want to start, Jim?
I've got a few things, yeah.
Okay.
One, the question about the existing access for the house number 88 at Mountain View Road. That is, as you can see, a separate part is being created as a separate lot. And with that thought, it strikes me as it could have, and as it already does have, it's existing ingress egress. And the remainder of the project, as obviously shown here, has its own as well. But they become 2 separate pieces of real estate. I look at our plan here and if there is a requirement that the existing homestead be connected to the loop road here, it would be an onerous requirement for the project.
Also,
Thank you.
For clarification on that, we didn't see it in the DPW memo, that suggestion. So I wasn't sure if we missed it when we looked at our DPW memo, but we didn't see that suggestion specifically noted in the memo. So we're sure.
Thank you. So, town staff, would you mind commenting on that and where this recommendation originates?
Yeah, so this comes out of chapter 13, where our bylaw prefers consolidated access, multiple points, we're loosening them down. It's not an outright requirement that there shall only be one point of access, so it's a gut check for the DRB with advice of Public Works. Our bylaw is certainly okay with this layout as it's shown, but it's just a gut check. If there would be a way to connect them through, our bylaw would also allow that.
Mr. Chair, on the topic of access, it is my understanding that now I'm focusing on the eastern road that we show connecting to Sally's Way. It's my understanding that one of the requirements for Sally's Way is that they have a curb cut to this project. But not have to build the road. And so I was a little mystified by the Department of Public Works comment that we would need to negotiate with Sally's Way about whether or not we could have a road that is required in their project.
So Jim, let me ask you a question. Is there a curb cut there?
So the Sally's Way final plans show the right of way, so the platted space for a road up to the property line. Their final plan set did not design the road. So where it would connect into Sally's Way, that would need to have the engineering and the design of the road done.
So we've run into this problem before. So who's paying for that spur? On Sally's Way property? Because I assume you want to pay to your property line, correct? Or are you paying all the way to Sally's Way?
I think, well, given the choice, who pays for it? Well, then I'll just stop there, no, but it is my understanding that they provided through the conditions of approval the right of way, but should it be built, it would be on our nickel. But the actual minutes, I guess, would prevail on the understanding.
Okay. So that's obviously worth looking into, because again, this topic has come up in the past.
Yeah.
Connectivity across different ownerships of parcels.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So it doesn't need to be decided today, just find it.
Yeah, so if they were to go that route, we would just need to see the associated documentation that the property owners are working together. We at the DRB and town staff, we don't care who's paying for what, but the legal documents that would go along with that construction, we would need to see.
Right. Okay.
Anything else that you'd like to bring up, the board?
It's on my back here, for failing to show entryways on units, 21, 2, 3, and 4. To join this face the street. Those buildings all are very capable of having entryways for the units put there with a connecting sidewalk to the street. And the fact that it's not on there is on me. I failed to get that on the plans.
So Jim, are you saying that the buildings will front the road?
Yes.
They appear to be fronting north.
Well, they appear that way now because there's no doors or walkways that connect them to the street.
Got it.
Yeah, and we understand that's a requirement and that we would have doors and
So
walkways.
there'd be a sidewalk coming in from the street to the
Yeah.
door and the front porch, what have
Yeah,
you. Okay,
yeah. It would be my hope for the triplets that one walk coming from the street would then branch into the street to the various doors.
okay, so you can obviously work on that when it comes back.
Yeah.
Very good, that's helpful. Is there anything else from the applicant at this time?
I think we'd like to touch on the front yard setback piece that we discussed on units 9 through 20.
Yeah, we'll get to public comment in a moment. We don't.
So. I guess this bears talking about if the DRB is not happy with the access there shown.
What are we talking about? We're talking about the
So
9 through 20.
9 through 20 on the south, or the south end of the property.
so the hammerhead or whatever you want to call it. That extends beyond the setback.
No, that's a different. Hammer.
Oh, yeah, I think that this, you just meant this.
Yeah,
So that's a number, that's a bylaw rule.
right. So as you know, David pointed out, you know, this project's main goal is to be designed to those fast food principles, which kind of outlines how we need to access the buildings to keep them in compliance. And you know, so these configurations aren't really intended as additional parking in that setback. I think, you know, buildings 15 through 20, we could move to the south and get outside of that setback area, as we have room there, but 9 through 14, we would really, you know, request some leniency in the regulations, or, you know, any feedback that the board would provide on how, if we could maintain it as it's drawn for those units.
It's not so much parking as it is impervious surface into the setback.
Driveways can cross the front yard setback at a 90-degree angle plus or 10 degrees, and here we're really going more parallel within the setback. So I think there's a way to reconfigure and maybe flip units so they can share driveways and you're just going straight in rather than having to arc around.
I think that, without speaking for the board, I think that this end of the board would suggest you work with the staff and get that fixed.
So this, may I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is your gym, this is your yard.
So. In my review of 46. 0.7.4. It talks about setbacks. And it talks about from the property line to the foundation. Where the setback would be. It fails to say that anything in between is part of that setback. It only appears to designate how close the building can be to the property line. And be that the case, these driveways as shown are 90 degrees from the curb, and they cross the setback line as shown at 90 degrees. And I would suggest that they comply the way they are right now. For your consideration.
Yeah, so
I
chapter,
would like staff.
yeah, chapter 46 is now chapter 44. It's the same chapter, just got renumbered. It's the definitions chapter. Chapter 38, residential zoning district. 38.3.4, what uses are permitted in the required setbacks. Required setbacks must be landscaped in compliance with chapter 23. But access drives, roads, pedestrian ways, underground utility lines, and where such lines are permitted, overhead utility lines may cross the required setback at a right angle plus or minus 10 degrees. So that's where higher up in 38.3, we say the front yard setback is 25 feet. We go to chapter 44 on how to measure that setback. And then 38.3 says access drives can cross that setback, but only at a 90-degree angle plus or minus 10 degrees.
So Emily,
the setback line as it's listed on this, is that, or is that accurate
I
as
would
far as we know?
presume so.
And
The road right of way is 64 feet.
if it is accurate, then aren't these parallel drives just, well, are they blatantly in violation of it or no?
They're entering the setback at a 90-degree angle.
And what about the parallel portions though?
Right, that's the portion that, maybe not all of it, but certainly majority of it is in that 25-foot setback.
And what is it about that parallel portion that you need here?
It's drawn this way, created this way from the need for the best of architecture to have the entrance not in the center of the building of the unit, but to one side. And it was also felt that if each of those units had their own parallel driveway, we'd go from curb cut, we would go from, in this instance, we'd be adding another 4 more curb cuts and driveways and a lot more impervious surface and
Or at least the same.
aesthetic
Yeah.
situation. Yeah.
So I think we can, the board will discuss that more in a deliberative session, but I think we do have an understanding of it and appreciate what you're trying to do there. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, Steph?
I think there's a solution.
Okay.
They've got smart engineers at their table, I think we can figure it out.
I mean, it's a different approach than the standard straight in driveway coming into a building that you see everywhere. Oh,
DRB, any other questions for the applicant at this point?
street trees.
Yeah,
I would favor street trees. To me, the rendering, I think you produced a rendering somewhere, it looks naked without it.
We haven't produced a rendering
Yeah,
yet.
we haven't produced a rendering yet.
Okay, well, I thought I was looking at something, but either way, it's to me, street trees help soften up the image of all the houses and boxes and what have you with it forward.
do you have a strong preference one way or the other?
I think the main consideration on the street trees was for that obstruction of the view shed that we talked about with the.
Yeah, I should clarify that, that recommendation was solely for the frontage of Mountain View Road, and then.
Right.
Staff does as well recommend street trees for along the proposed loop road on both sides.
I
Okay,
think we can be thoughtful in our choice of street trees. I think there may be overhead power lines there as well. So with careful spacing and species selection, we can try to accommodate both.
so, all right. Well, I'd like to. Does anyone else have any comments here?
No.
Applicant good for the moment?
Because of a hearing disability, I'm not exactly sure where we landed on the sidewalk issue. Or not an issue. Concern. And
15 points.
Well, I think Emily is drawing with green and red. Kind of laid out what was required and what was not required.
Well, I think from the board's perspective, we were happy to hear that you do not have a problem with adding sidewalks in the typical fashion to units 24, 21, 23. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I think.
Or entrances with
correct,
sidewalks? Okay. thank
that's
you.
correct.
And then I'm gonna go back to staff and talk about the sidewalks in general again, and Emily, maybe if you could just, or David, to just explain the green and red lines one more time, please.
I'll defer to Emily.
Yeah, so our bylaw requires sidewalks, or where shown on official map, multi-use path along both sides of existing and proposed roads. So the green is the places where a sidewalk needs to be added. The one green section up along Mountain View Road, that's the section of multi-use path frontage. The red is where the strictest interpretation of our bylaw would require a sidewalk, however, it would be duplicative, to have a sidewalk parallel to the Mountain View Road path when there's no home serving that site. And then like a sidewalk serving the stormwater pond also would be duplicative when those homes can cross the street to get to the community center. So there's two places where a sidewalk isn't necessary, and then the rest of it is completing that requirement.
And therefore, what I think I'm understanding is to this, you're proposing sidewalks that are green.
Mhm.
And
In addition to.
in addition to the ones that we show.
Yes.
Right, and I understand that is a requirement, but I should like to make, some points to the board that, they could have the discretion to, not require those green as shown, except on Mountain View Road right away, for the, future path. And my rationale is, we show sidewalks serving 26 of the 32 units already. And adding the sidewalks as shown in green, pretty much don't serve any units except the 21 through
23.
21, 23, and 24. And I suggest that instead of having sidewalks all along that stretch on both sides of the road, as well as down into Sally's Way on both sides of the road, that it's a waste of natural resources. Concrete is a finite resource. Number one. And number two, those units can easily be served with a crosswalk to get them people over to the sidewalk that we show. And having said that, we all understand crosswalks are traffic calming devices. And so I just throw that out for your deliberations, and we understand that projects throughout town are experiencing high speeds and speed bumps having to be put in and so on. So just building in a good traffic calming thing like the crosswalk, this seems to make good sense, and saving over 20 yards of concrete for the sidewalk as shown in green might also be for that.
Emily, does where you have drawn in the green specifically in the areas that are served by the, by the, in front of the existing units,
Mhm.
are they required to have sidewalks on both sides of the street?
Sort of, so let me quote the bylaw. So the DRB's interpretation has been the most strict interpretation of this section of bylaw that I'm about to read, which is anywhere there's a street, put a sidewalk on both sides. What 15.2.4 says, a sidewalks or recreation paths be provided along roads. Sidewalks that are designed and built to the public works specs must be provided along both sides of all existing and proposed roads, except where the DRB finds that the type and or density of development served by the existing or proposed road does not necessitate a sidewalk or recreation path, or at least a sidewalk or recreation path on both sides of the road. In making this determination, the DRB shall be guided by these principles. The guiding principles are, I summarize, areas of low intensity commercial or industrial development. Where the safe, adequate bicycle and pedestrian circulation is provided by an off-street system of paths. And then in the ARZV. So the DRB can find that the type and density of development does not necessitate a sidewalk or recreation path on both sides of the road. And then those 3 case studies are guiding principles. They're not the only circumstances where it can be applied. The DRB's interpretation over the past several years has been very strict, requiring sidewalks. There probably could be a middle ground here where the sidewalks are walked back a little bit in the green that's shown on the map and still fulfills the requirement of the bylaw. Certainly, we would want everybody to walk out their front door and be able to safely cross the street to a sidewalk or walk down a short jog to get to a crosswalk, that kind of thing.
Good. Thank you, Emily. All right. Is there anything else at this point? I would like to open this up to public comment as well. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have another chance, or you'll have another chance to weigh in. But is there anything right now you'd like to? Okay. In that case, let's open this up to public comment. Is there anyone from the public, either in person or online, that would like? Yeah. If you could please approach the microphone to your right and my left, and
Yep, and there's one person on Zoom that can go next. Welcome to pull the chair over.
That's what I was looking for.
thank you for coming up.
I don't plan to give an address.
All right. If you could please just state your name and address for the record, and then please go ahead.
My name is Carl Fowler. I reside at 178 Meadow Run Road. I am former president of the Road Association, but I am not speaking on behalf of the association. Speaking on my own behalf. I have a couple of questions mostly. And a comment, which is that I think this is a very attractively designed project. We've known for a long time that the former farm across the road from this was going to be developed. Hopefully the quality will be as good as we all expect it to be. One of the things I'm concerned about is the loss of the sense of a neighborhood that we have now with the defining barriers of trees that have naturally formed between Meadow Run and Mountain View. And I'm wondering if we could expect that line of trees to be at least in part retained, which would also have the effect of, to some degree, insulating us from sound from the development, and perhaps giving us more of the feeling that things are as they've always been.
Thank you. I'm going to go to staff first here and let them comment, and if we need to go to the applicant after that, we can.
Yeah, so you're referring to the hedgerow that's developed at the south of this parcel in north.
Yeah, it's wild, self-established planting. Some of it's jungle-like, but others are quite magnificent trees. The effect, and I would have no problem with being pruned or clipped, but the effect of it is to make a feeling of privacy and a sound burden.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I can say that the proposed design is to retain those trees, which is also in alignment with what the bylaw says in terms of maintaining a buffer there. If there is existing vegetation that can meet the requirements of the screening buffer, then it should be retained, even in the RZD. So along that southern edge of the parcel, that hedgerow should be retained.
So sorry, David, I thought I heard you first say it's not in the current plan, but then it sounds like it.
Oh, sorry, if I misspoke.
I probably misunderstood you, but just.
It is in the current plan.
Okay.
As proposed by this pre-application concept design, it shows that hedgerow intact.
Okay.
And that is consistent with our bylaw, which requires a buffer to be there.
Thank you, and I'll just go back to the applicant real quick in case you have any comments. You don't need to, but if you do, please throw them at us.
I would love to comment on that. Hedgerows are an extremely important part for wildlife, and we wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the two open air sediment ponds for stormwater.
And my concern is that they would not hold steady when it wasn't raining. We're not looking at a permanent pond that it doesn't have any real natural function. Concern being mostly the breeding of mosquitoes. But we've been blessedly free of that in our part of town. That I think they're being called.
Gravel wetlands? Is that-
Yeah, gravel wetlands. I assume a gravel wetland is designed to filter. Would it also be a permanent pond?
So it will not have any standing water above the surface. It will be water, but it'll be in the media, so I would indicate it.
That answers my question very thoroughly, very completely. Finally, in the triplex unit, what is the actual height of the roof line above the street?
Less than the maximum.
36 feet, I know. It's
Yeah.
maximum.
Yeah, so I mean, the architectural plans are still under development, but it will be less than, 36 or less.
My home will be directly across the street from those buildings, so to the degree that their height effect can be minimized, obviously I have a selfish reason to hope that will be the case. But I know they're gonna be in compliance. Roads. The discussion of the possible exit road going into the new development, Sally. We've been in a cul-de-sac neighborhood for many, many years. We're not gonna be a cul-de-sac anymore because Whitewater is already being driven through the new neighborhood that's being built just to the east. And that's fine. I'm concerned that we minimize the number of cuts onto Mountain View to avoid nasty backups of traffic just before the light. And to keep the traffic flowing on it. And partially it's because my neighborhood, I expect, will now become a public route to bypass that light. The same as you can bypass some of the lights on Route 2 and 2A by taking Zephyr Road. And that's just gonna happen. People aren't stupid, they'll figure it out, it's possible to go around. But the greater number of cuts that you have on the Mountain View, the more likelihood that not only will there be potential for accidents and slow ups on Mountain View, but the connecting roads also have the opportunity to potentially involve backed up traffic. A lot of traffic goes up and down 2A now. I've been here for 13 years, it's staggering at 1:30 in the afternoon, how far back that frequently is. And extra cuts, if possible, should be minimized. I'm not accusing this project of that, it has to have an entrance, obviously, without question. But I would not like to see multiple cuts coming out of it.
So curb cuts are something that the DRB will always consider minimizing. It is not strictly stated in the bylaw that it must be that way all the time. But would staff care to explain that better than I just did?
Sure, I think there's kind of two components to this. The first component is more philosophical. It's the general principle of connectivity, providing multiple routes to get to a place. So in a perfectly gridded city, if one intersection is backed up, there's many options for moving around a community. Here, we're in a more suburban environment where Route 2A is the only connector for a large regional area. And our bylaw requires that neighborhoods have connectivity, that there be different options for people to move around both locally and regionally. Secondary to that is when new intersections and roads are put in, that they're done in a way that meets separation distances and sightline requirements and other standards of transportation design. They're not outright required to have that connection to Sally's Way. Our bylaw says a development with 40 units or less can operate on a single point of access. But even if they do that, we would still want to see the right of way and still want to see the platted potential for those connections. For example, when Meadow Run was constructed, it platted that right of way to what is now the Sally's Way parcel, which is how they're able to connect through. So there's a guiding principle in our bylaw that if developments can connect, they should do it, or they should at least provide the legal right for that connection.
And back behind Forest Road, there's an emergency exit from our neighborhoods, although in the event of something really bad, you might have to ram it with your car to get the gate open, but I'm not, again, opposed to the fact that Whitewater now might be a through street, and I'm definitely not opposed to this development having a right access to the Mountain View. But I just caution, the cuts keep coming. We've got the annex now at the top of the hill above the creek, 2A, that's beginning to back traffic up, although I think more towards 2, but it's beginning to back traffic up. There will now be a second exit from that neighborhood, just at the top of the hill dropping down to the bridge. On Mountain View, there will also be an exit that exists, but is likely to have immensely more traffic on it if they ever build something like the 72 unit project that they backed away from, built around the church on the other side of Mountain View. And that, if one of these maps is right, it appears the intention is to sort of feed directly into Whitewater. This is a tough one, but bear in mind that existing neighborhoods, peace and quiet and contentment, is at least to some degree impacted by the ability to leave and come home. And it's getting harder and harder to do that now in this part of Williston due to historically overwhelmed infrastructure. And I'm concerned about overwhelming it even more.
Thank you for that comment, and I want you to know that the board, myself, appreciates it. It is a real concern. I would also like to point out that this property as proposed is not being developed to the full extent that it could be. So everything for us is a balance.
Once again, I'm not opposed to the cut for this neighborhood to go out, not in the slightest. Obviously, it has to be built, and I have full confidence it'll be done the right way. It is this sort of cascade, though, of additional cuts and additional cuts that begin to, and just the observed traffic. Anyone who's driven on 2A the last couple of years, and I don't want to go back to the SERP. I was a proponent of the SERP, so I'm not going to whine and didn't build the SERP. But the fact is that the existing infrastructure is, in fact, overwhelmed. And
So I'll stop you
moving
there.
slower and slower.
I think that's a very valid concern, and I thank you for it.
Otherwise, I'm satisfied.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I commend the McCulloughs for their openness and sharing the plan, and I trust that it will be done well.
Thank you very much. Are there any other public comments on Zoom, perhaps?
Yeah.
Todd, I'm allowing you to speak now. You should be all set.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, hang on a second. Colin, can you turn the volume up on that laptop so it's out? Hang on a second, Todd.
It's all right.
No, it should be coming out of the owl. Todd, I think you're all set to speak.
Okay, can you hear me all right? Yep. Excellent. Okay, my name is Todd Reardon. I own Sally's Way and also Elevation Construction, so the neighboring development here. And I've got just a
Sorry,
couple.
could you please state your address, your street address for the record too?
The property address that I own is 230 Mountain View Road.
Thank you. Okay.
So just a couple of things. I guess one, obviously there's a lot of discussion about the planned connection, and I would put out there that, certainly I would be open to discussion and working with the applicant's design team on what that looks like. A couple of my concerns regarding it that I think that engineering team would need to look at would be things like the DPW spec on underdrain, where that's got to go, and also sort of the grading profile and what that ends up creating between those two house sites on our development, as water sheds from that higher grade. What is that actually doing to our property? So I think I've always looked at this area as an opportunity to work with the town and whoever may be building it, because we've got sewer, we've got water, we've got everything right there. But there obviously are some documents that we need to dance around to get an understanding of what needs to happen there. So again, open the discussion. We can swap information, but that would be my comment on the connection for this evening. My second item was I've got some concerns the way the design shows now in terms of the management of the stormwater. Those of you that are familiar with the site probably understand that generally from west to east, you reduce elevation sort of across the profile of the entire combined parcels, this one and my own. And I've just noted the two discharges from the storm ponds appear to, though they discharge within the property lines of this proposed development, I'd be curious what the management of that discharge would look like. And again, to put out there, I think without doing anything, there's a kind of a negligent turning of the eye in just discharging towards homes. But we have the ability where we're at right now to potentially work together on managing that along the property line to help both parcels here. So gravel wetland 1 and 2, I believe what I'm seeing on the southernmost end of each of those would be considered the discharge. It's obviously not labeled at this stage of design, but I would assume that the design team has that in mind. And then really just to go, I mean, it's kind of the same concept, but like where that modular block retaining wall is, I mean, typically to build that correctly, you're gonna, you'll have some blocks buried below grade. You're likely gonna have fabric and drainage. Again, that's gonna consolidate some amount of drainage that is gonna need to discharge beyond that wall, and it will inherently be projected in the direction of home sites below. And I think there's a management practice that could be put in here that would preserve home values and, perhaps damage or anything like that should large rain events or runoff events occur. A question, I guess, for the design team is the wetland delineations that we're showing on our project. I know those obviously cross the property lines, and I guess my greatest curiosity would be how the wetland mitigation and or need to mitigate those lines is handled specifically on units 24 and then 21, 2, and 3. I guess the triplex there. Um, I know on an earlier version of Sally's Way, it showed, basically right there where we have wetland C essentially as that creeps over. That continuation on the Sally's Way portion is what you're seeing in the purple lines on the site plan. It's kind of gray and hard to see, but so just to go on record as asking the question, but I'm sure the design team is planning to or has looked at that. But those units in particular, I believe are in that footprint, and I didn't know if there's a mitigation for that or if that is still needing to be designed somewhere along that edge of the development. And I think honestly, most of my other comments were actually already addressed, and for the time being, I think I'll just wait until you guys deliberate on the rest of them. But like I said, being that I'm developing the piece that I own right next door, I'd like to just throw out sort of a proactive flag to work together on making this all work, and trying to alleviate as much of some of these other issues to make this whole neighborhood feel like one.
For sure, and I want to thank you for doing this and also for doing it at pre-app. While there's a lot of value at this time in these many suggestions that you've offered, probably the best thing we can do tonight is hope to put you all in touch with each other, which I'm sure town staff would be happy to do. So if you reach out to town staff, please do. And if both parties here do the same and want to share contact info, sorry to put this on you, staff, but I'm sure you're willing to do that. And I also would like to give staff and the applicant a chance to comment on what we just heard briefly.
Okay, yeah,
Don't feel like you have to, but if you want to.
so I guess I'll touch a little bit on the stormwater pieces. I think we, definitely would love to connect and, thank you for your comments and, get a better sense of your design plans and maybe, share any information we can to make this the most, the best design for both projects. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think our intent with the discharge points is, we only had little snippets of these alleyway plans that we were able to dig up from the local records, I believe, and we saw some stormwater pipes that looked like we're collecting some of the upstream stormwater runoff from the parcel, before we're planning our development. So we were just trying to direct that water to those same pipes to then flow down to your drainage systems. And, of course, we'll have to get state stormwater permits and prove that our runoff rates are being reduced and all that. But yeah, definitely happy to work with your team and figure out the best way to go forward with that. I guess we'll get in contact with staff for you want to talk about wetlands at all, or?
Yeah, I think this is something that, Todd, thanks so much for the comments. Love to hear that you want to work with us on this. And these are all considerations that have come into our mind. Mitigation of wetlands is one, and it's a class 3 wetland. So we're aware of those implications and we'll make sure everything meets the state, local, federal requirements. So that's what I'll offer right now.
Thank you. Todd, are you good for now? Is that everything?
Yes, yeah, like I said, I think most of the other items were addressed, and I think for right now that I think we could connect and see where this goes.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other comments from the public on Zoom tonight?
No other comments on Zoom.
Okay, thanks, Emily. DRB, any last questions, comments for the applicant?
Yeah.
All right, in that case, we are going to close this hearing at 8:38 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you for your work. Oh, week after week, month, year over year. Thank you.
So we're gonna move into other business. We have BP 24-01, a final plan filing deadline extension request. How should I handle this, Emily?
Yes, so the board can take a vote to approve the file extension request. You can do that now, or you could wait until we come out of the deliberations.
Yeah, we'll just, in case if there is no other public comment, we will move into the deliberative session. DRB has exited deliberative session. We are back in regular session at 9:18 PM. Do I have a motion for DP 26-08?
Yes, as authorized by WD 6.6.3, I, Scott Riley, move that the Williston Development Review Board, having reviewed the application submitted and all accompanying materials, including the recommendation of the town staff and the advisory board, is required to comment on this application by the Williston Development bylaw, and having heard and duly considered the testimony presented at the public hearing of February 24th, 2026, accept the recommendations for DP 26-08 and authorize this application to move forward to discretionary permit review.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Jim. Do we have any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All are in favor, motion carries. 4 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Thanks, Scott. I'll get it eventually.
You're doing
Do
fine.
we have a motion for DP 24-08.1?
Yes. As authorized by WDB 6.6.3, I, Matthew Fraser, move that Williston Development Review Board, having reviewed the application submitted and all accompanying materials, including the recommendations of the town's staff and advisory board, required to comment on this application by the Williston Development bylaws, and having heard and duly considered the testimony presented at the public hearing of January 27th, 2026 and February 24th, 2026, accept the recommendations of DP 24-08.1 and authorize this application to move forward to growth management and or discretionary permit review. The following modifications were made to read 1.c units 21, 22, 23, 24 must fulfill the pedestrian connection standards of the WDB. 38.9.2.1 secondary entrances facing south or west are encouraged. Also, section 2D. The existing house at 88 Mountain View Road, proposed on lot 1, may retain its own curb cut onto Mountain View Road with the right of way and connection of Sally's Way must pick one of the two options discussed above. 2F WDB 15, multiple use path construction along the entry of the Mountain View Road frontage, lots 1 and 2. To property line, sidewalks along both sides of the proposed road can be reduced in linear feet overall, providing that each dwelling has a pedestrian connection. In consultation with planning and zoning staff and DPW staff. 2J WDB 26. Street trees along both sides of the proposed road, street trees along Mountain View Road to preserve the scenic vista with species selection to maintain the mountain view and avoid overhead utility conflicts.
That's it.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Jim. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 4 ayes, none opposed, motion carries. Do I have a motion for filing extension DP 24-01?
Sure, I'll make a motion. I, Scott Riley, do make a motion for DP 24-01 for final plan filing deadline extension until May 9th, 2026.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Jim. All in favor?
Aye.
4 ayes, or sorry, any opposed? Guessing no, that was all 4 of us. 4 in favor, none opposed, motion carries. In minutes of December 9th, we have 2 sets of minutes to approve tonight. We'll start with December 9th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes, December 9th?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of December 9th.
Thank you, Scott.
I will second.
Thank you, Jim. All in favor?
I,
Aye, motion carries. We have a motion to approve the minutes of January 27th.
I will motion to approve the minutes of January 27th.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Scott. All in favor?
I,
Motion carries. Do we have any further business?
Good.
Hearing none.
You're good.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Scott. Second? Second.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Unopposed, motion carries. We're done at 9:20. Very good.